They took my arms on a Tuesday. I know that sounds like the kind of thing a man says to get a laugh, to make the horror smaller by giving it a day of the week, but I mean it literally. It was a Tuesday. I remember because the mess hall had been serving reconstituted protein loaf, which they only did on Tuesdays, and I was thinking about how much I hated protein loaf when the Werk breaching unit punched through the bulkhead of Deck 7, and the world became fire and noise, and then a grinding, mechanical scream that I slowly realized was coming from me. My name is Sergeant Darian Cole. I was 29 years old. I had brown hair that needed cutting, a scar on my chin from a bar fight in Lisbon I was not proud of, and two arms that had served me well for my entire life up to that moment. I am telling you this because what comes after requires you to understand what was lost. You can't understand what a man becomes if you don't first know what he was. The Werk ship had been in high orbit above Kelsara Station for 11 days before they decided to stop negotiating. Negotiating was the wrong word for what the Werk did, actually. The Werk did not negotiate. They issued chronological tolerances, that was their phrase, delivered through the translation matrix in that flat, buzzing tone they used for everything, as though the distinction between a question and a statement was a human weakness they had chosen not to adopt. You have been issued a chronological tolerance of 11 days. When the tolerance expires, compliance or elimination will proceed. That was the message. Delivered to Admiral Youn through the diplomatic channel, copied to every station commander in the sector, formatted with the same bureaucratic precision they used to file resource extraction reports. The Werk were not cruel. That was what people kept getting wrong about them. Cruelty implies preference, implies that they wanted you to suffer, which would mean they cared about you enough to want something. The Werk did not care about us at all. To them, we were an inefficiency, a biological occupation of space they had calculated as belonging to them, filling it with noise and heat and the kinds of complex, irrational behavior that their models could not reliably predict. They wanted the space. We were in it. The math was simple. What they had not calculated, in 11 days of high orbit and chronological tolerances, was what we would do when the tolerance expired. I was in the armory on Deck 7 when they came through. Not because I was supposed to be, I was off rotation, killing time before a 16-hour shift, cleaning a rifle that didn't need cleaning because that's what soldiers do when they're too tired to sleep. The breaching unit hit 3 meters to my left. Later, the engineers told me it was a Werk precision insertion device, designed to cut through station hull plating and deposit a kill team in a confined space with minimal collateral structural damage. Efficient, precise, devastating. The blast took me off my feet and into the back wall. The concussion rang through my skull like a bell. When I came up off the floor, there were 3 of them in the smoke, tall, armored in that layered carapace material that their biology secreted over their exoskeletons, carrying those long-barreled weapons that fired coherent plasma at a frequency, specifically tuned to penetrate human body armor. They were already moving, already scanning the space with the 4 flat optical sensors that served them as eyes, and I was between them and the corridor that led to the command deck. What happened next is something I have tried to explain to a lot of people, and I have never quite managed it, not because the sequence of events is complicated. The sequence of events is very simple. I got up. I got in the way. It went badly for my arms. But the why of it, the why is harder. I can tell you there was a private named Kirilos down that corridor, 22 years old and on her first deep station posting, and she was directly in the line of the kill team's path. I can tell you that I had 3 seconds and no weapon and no good options. I can tell you all of that, and it is all true, and none of it is the real reason. The real reason is that I could not make myself get out of the way. That's all there is to it, finally. I have tried to dress it up as heroism or tactics or calculation, and it is none of those things. I just could not make myself step aside. The thought of stepping aside felt wrong in a way that was bigger than survival instinct, bigger than fear. It was like being asked to stop breathing. My body refused. So I went at them. The first one I got with a wrench from the floor rack. The wrench shattered against the carapace plating, which should have told me something about what came next, but the momentum was already gone, already past the point of taking back. The second one caught my left arm in those gripping appendages they have, not hands, not quite, more like the articulated jaw of something that evolved to tear open hard-shelled prey, and it squeezed, and I heard and felt things that I will not describe because I want you to still be with me for the rest of this story. The third one was bringing up its weapon when Private Carrillo's came back around the corridor bend and put a full burst into the side of its head. She had heard the breach alarm and come back. She should not have come back. She saved my life. I was on the floor again. Both arms now, not just the one. The second Verk unit was still moving, still functional, and it swung toward Carrillo's with its weapon arm coming up, and I did the only thing left to me. I threw myself into it from the floor, full body, knocking its aim wide as it fired, the plasma burst going into the ceiling instead of through Carrillo's chest. We hit the deck together, the Verk unit and I, and it was much heavier than I was and much stronger than I was, and I held on anyway, screaming something I don't remember, while Carrillo's emptied another magazine into it at close range. The third one retreated through the breach before she could cycle. I don't remember anything after that for a while. I woke up in the medical bay 3 days later, and the first thing I saw was the ceiling of Kalsara Station's Level 2 Trauma Center, which was a pale gray with a long brown water stain running diagonally toward the air recycler. And the second thing I saw was the face of a woman I had never seen before. She was not human. I have described the Verk. This was not a Verk. She was roughly humanoid, 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, bilateral symmetry, the basic chassis, but the proportions were slightly wrong in ways that took me a moment to inventory. Her eyes were too large and the irises filled them entirely, a dark amber that caught the medical bay's thin light and held it. Her skin was a deep blue-gray that seemed to shift in the periphery, like water above a very deep place. Her fingers, where they rested on the edge of my bed, had an extra joint. She was wearing a gray garment that was either a uniform or a garment so plain it functioned as one, and she was watching me with an expression I could not read. You were losing approximately 400 milliliters of blood per minute when the medics reached you, she said. Her voice went through the translator implant smoothly, which meant her species had been in the database long enough to have a working language profile. They have told me that you should not be alive. Where am I? My voice came out like gravel in a tin can. Kalsara Station, Medical Level 2. She tilted her head, which was a human gesture and therefore either learned or coincidental. I am S. Savith Iorath. I am the diplomatic attaché for the Velnara sovereignty. I have been on this station for 4 months. I was on Deck 3 when the breaching occurred. I have been told you were on Deck 7. I tried to move my arms. I got the signal and it didn't connect with anything. Yes, she said. She did not say it gently or harshly. She said it the way you state a coordinate. Both have been removed to the shoulder joint. The damage was not repairable. I am sorry. The surgeons tell me that human medical technology can provide upper limb prosthetics of good functional range, but the process is long and the nerve interface can be. Did we hold the station? She paused. The pause was brief but real, a fraction of a second in which something moved behind those amber eyes, something recalculating. You held the station, she said. The breaching unit you disabled was the only one to penetrate the hull. When it failed to reach the command deck, the Verk ship withdrew to a distance of 40,000 kilometers. Their secondary chronological tolerance has not yet been issued. I closed my eyes. I thought about Protein Loaf. I thought about Private Carrillo's who should have run and didn't. I thought about Tuesday. How many casualties? I asked. 11 dead, 32 injured. How many would it have been if the kill team reached command? The pause again, longer this time. The station complement is 312. I kept my eyes closed. I did the math I didn't want to do and came up with a number I didn't want to have. I lay there with no arms and that number and the pale gray ceiling with its brown water stain, and I breathed. "You can go," I said. "I'm fine." "You are not fine," HFY said. She said it with the same coordinate precision she'd used for everything else. Not unkind, not kind, precise. "But I will return tomorrow. I wanted to confirm you were conscious. I had a question I wished to ask you." "What question?" "Why," she said, "I watched the armory security recording. You had an exit route. You had approximately 2.4 seconds in which you could have cleared the kill team's line of approach. You did not use it. Every calculation I have run produces the same result. The probability of your survival was significantly higher if you moved rather than engaged. I have been trying to understand why you did not take that option." I opened my eyes. She was still watching me with that amber gaze, those still, wide eyes that held light like amber holds insects. "Because someone was behind me," I said. She waited. That was all I said. After a moment, she stood, and the movement was graceful in a way that made me think of deep water, of things that moved through it without effort. "I will return tomorrow," she said and left. She came back the next day, and the day after that. She came back every day for the 6 weeks I spent in the medical bay, which was longer than I was supposed to be there but shorter than they had predicted, because I healed faster than the doctors expected, and also because I drove the nursing staff to a quiet, professional despair with my recovery impatience. She would sit in the chair beside my bed and ask me things. Sometimes about the armory. Sometimes about Earth, which she had not visited but had studied through diplomatic briefings that she told me were deeply misleading on the subject of what humans were actually like. Sometimes about small things, food, music, the bar fight in Lisbon, the origin of the scar. I asked her things too. About the Velnara sovereignty, which turned out to be a civilization of roughly 200 billion individuals spread across 11 planetary systems, with a diplomatic tradition that went back to before humanity had learned to write. About her specifically, what she had done before she came to Kelsara, whether there were people waiting for her somewhere, what she ate for breakfast. She answered with that same precise, unadorned honesty she used for everything, and after a while I realized that it wasn't coldness. It was just the way her people talked. They said what was true. They did not dress it up or soften it or perform around it. It was, I thought, a very efficient way to live. I did not tell her that I found it beautiful. That felt like the wrong word for the moment, given that I was still mostly held together with surgical adhesive. Admiral Youn came to see me in week 3. She was a small woman with close-cropped silver hair and the bearing of someone who had been dealing with impossible situations for so long that she'd stopped registering them as impossible. She sat across from me and told me, in her quiet, precise way, that I was being recommended for the Joint Forces Commendation, and that the medical team was working on a prosthetic solution, and that the Verk had not yet re-engaged, but that command believed the pause was strategic rather than merciful. "The attaché has been here every day," the Admiral said. It was not a question. "She asks a lot of questions," I said. The Admiral looked at me for a moment with an expression I couldn't quite read. "The Velnara have been neutral in the Verk incursion for 4 years," she said. "They have resources and capabilities that would substantially affect the conflict's outcome. They have consistently declined to become involved." She paused. HFY has sent 3 communications to Her Sovereignty's Diplomatic Council in the past 2 weeks. We're not able to read them, of course. But 3 communications in 2 weeks is unusual. She has sent, on average, 1 per month since her arrival. I didn't say anything. "I'm not asking you to do anything," the Admiral said. "I just thought you should know." She left. I lay there, and thought about what it meant that a woman from a civilization of 200 billion had started sending unusual numbers of messages home after spending time beside my bed asking me about bar fights and protein loaf, and why I couldn't make myself move out of the way. I didn't know what it meant. I was working on it. The Werk issued their secondary chronological tolerance at the end of my 4th week. 11 days. Same as the first one. Admiral Young's briefing came with a tactical projection that nobody liked. They were bringing 2 more ships, positioning them in a triangulation that their previous probe would have given them good data to optimize. The first breaching attempt had been reconnaissance as much as attack. They had learned what they needed to learn about Kelsara's defenses. The second attempt would be different. I was out of the medical bay by day 6 of the tolerance. The prosthetics were not ready. The nerve interface process took months, but I was ambulatory and functional from the elbows up in temporary units, blocky things that looked like tools rather than limbs, but had enough grip strength for basic operation. I reported to Captain Daria Chen in the tactical center and told her I was back on duty. She looked at my temporary arms for a moment. Then she said, "Welcome back, Sergeant." Savith found me in the corridor afterward, which meant she had known where I was going before I went there. "You cannot fight with those," she said, looking at the prosthetics. "Not unkind, precise." "I can do a lot of things with these," I said. "You are preparing for the next incursion, aren't you?" She was quiet for a moment. We were standing in the corridor outside the tactical center, the station's recycled air moving between us with its faint metallic smell. She was wearing the same gray that she always wore, and she was watching me with those amber eyes that held light the way deep things held it. "The Velnara sovereignty has a medical technology," she said, "that was developed approximately 800 years ago in response to a conflict with a species that favored dismemberment as a tactical method. We found that conventional prosthetics were insufficient. What we developed instead was an interface protocol. It doesn't replace lost limbs with mechanical substitutes. It interfaces with the remaining neural architecture and builds something new from it, something that is grown rather than manufactured." I looked at her. "It takes 12 hours, she said. "It is not reversible. The result is not human anatomy. It has never been used on a human subject. I do not know with certainty that it will work on human neural architecture, though I have reviewed your medical scans and I believe the probability is high." She paused. "I also do not have authorization from my sovereignty to offer it. I am offering it anyway." The corridor was very quiet. Somewhere deeper in the station, something in the ventilation system made a sound like a long exhale. "Why?" I said. She considered the question for what felt like a long time. The amber eyes moved over my face with a care that I had come to recognize. The way she looked at things she was trying to understand. The way she looked when she was being precise. "Because someone was behind you," she said, "and you could not make yourself move. I have been thinking about that answer for 4 weeks. I have calculated it from many angles. I believe it is the most important thing I have ever been told." I looked at my temporary arms, then I looked at her. 12 hours, I said. "Beginning now if you choose." The process took place in the Velnara diplomatic quarters, which Savith had converted into something between a medical bay and a laboratory. There were no machines I recognized. The interface protocol she described worked through a medium that looked like bioluminescent fluid, sealed in contact with what remained of my shoulder joints and the nerve clusters the surgeons had preserved there. She administered something that she said was an analgesic and a neural catalyst, and I felt it move through me like warm water moving uphill, which should not have been a sensation but was. I don't have good language for what happened in the 12 hours that followed. I was conscious for parts of it. I was not conscious for most of it. What I remember is mostly a series of sensations that had no names, yet a pressure that was not pain, heat that was not heat, a feeling like learning something in the instant before you know what it is. At some point Savith was beside me, and I could feel dimly, through the haze of whatever she'd given me, her hand, three-jointed, cool, against the side of my face. "You are doing well," she said, precise, unadorned. I held on to that. I woke up on the floor of the diplomatic quarters because the medical platform had not been designed for a human body, and at some point in the early hours I had rolled off it. This was, in retrospect, fine, because the first thing I did upon waking was grab the edge of the platform to pull myself upright, and the grip I used was not the grip I remembered having. I looked at my hands. They were not the hands I had lost. They were longer than human hands, and the proportion of the fingers was different, longer, with a slight curve to the outer ones that suggested something evolved for gripping curved surfaces, for climbing or for holding things that moved. The skin had a scale-like texture, dark, iridescent when the light caught it, layered like the overlapping edge of feathers. The nails, if that was the right word, were hard and darkly translucent, shaped like curved blades, and where the light hit them at the right angle they shifted from black to deep blue to something close to violet. They were, I understood very slowly as I turned them in the light of the diplomatic quarters, exactly what Savith had said. Not replacements, something new. Something built from what was left of me, and grown into something that had no name in any human language I knew. I thought of what I'd heard about them before I'd quite registered what I was looking at. Dragon claws. That was what Kirilos called them later, when she saw. She said it with a particular tone that I took a while to decipher and eventually understood was awe. Dragon claws. As if someone had listened to all the things humanity had ever imagined about power and transformation and had given me the word for it. I flexed them. The joints moved with a smoothness that my original hands had never had. No catch, no resistance, no morning stiffness. And the grip strength was not something I could measure against any prior experience because I had no prior experience that applied. I picked up the edge of the metal platform and lifted it, and I stopped when I had it 3 feet off the ground because it became clear I was not near the limit, and I was not entirely sure I wanted to know where the limit was. Not yet. "Good morning," Savith said from behind me. I had not heard her come in. I turned. She was in the doorway, holding 2 cups of something that steamed. She was looking at my hands with an expression I'd never seen on her before. In 4 weeks of daily visits and careful, precise questions, I had learned to read her face well enough to know when she was calculating versus when she was feeling, and this was feeling. There was something in her face that was very quiet and very large. "They worked," I said. "Yes," she said. "Slightly better than my highest probability estimate." She crossed the room and held out one of the cups. I took it in the new hands. The dark iridescent grip closed around warm ceramic, and I did not break it. "Thank you," I said. She looked at me for a moment over the rim of her own cup. "Do not thank me," she said. "I broke 4 protocols of my sovereignty's neutrality directive to do this. I will have to answer for it." "Will you be in trouble?" "Yes," she said, unadorned, no softening. "I'm sorry." "I am not." She looked out the viewport at the stars and the distant points of light that were the Verk ships. "I sent a communication to the Sovereignty Council last night. I told them what I had done and why. I also told them what I had observed in my time on the station, and in particular in the Armory security recording that I have now watched approximately 60 times. She paused. "I told them about the man who could not make himself move." I was quiet. "My people have been neutral for 4 years, she said. "We told ourselves it was rational, that the Verk incursion was an inefficiency that would self-correct, that involvement would cost more than abstention, that the calculus of lives was too complex for unilateral action. We are very good at calculations." Her amber eyes came back to me. "I have never before watched someone choose, in 2.4 seconds, not to calculate." The Verk's secondary tolerance expired on a Wednesday. The breaching attempt came at 3:40 station time, when most of the crew was in light rotation, and the tactical team had been running on stimulants for 11 days. It came in 3 vectors simultaneously, which was what the projection had predicted, and it was very bad in the way that things are very bad when a superior force has had time to study your weaknesses and correct for their earlier mistakes. I was on Deck 3 with the rapid response team when the first breach alarm went off. I was wearing a modified combat harness, modified because the standard upper limb assembly didn't accommodate what I had now, and carrying a modified sidearm in my left hand and nothing in my right, because it turned out that with what I had in my right, carrying a weapon was redundant. What I can tell you about the next 4 hours, I will tell you precisely and without exaggeration, because the security recordings exist and have been reviewed many times, and there is no need to dress it up. I killed 11 Verk units in those 4 hours, not because I am a remarkable soldier, I am a competent one, but because the grip strength and reaction time I now possessed were outside the parameters of what the Verk kill teams had been designed to fight. Their equipment was calibrated for human physiology. Their tactical training had been modeled on human response times. When I came at them at angles and speeds their models did not include, they could not adapt quickly enough. The Verk were precise and efficient. They were not, it turned out, flexible. It was the moment on Deck 7 again. Except now the answer to their precision was something they had not built into their calculations. The third breach team had cornered a group of engineering personnel in the Deck 2 maintenance corridor when I got there. 7 Verk units, 15 crew members backed against a sealed bulkhead, the kind of situation where the outcome was already decided if you ran the numbers. I came through the maintenance shaft above them, and I dropped into the middle of it, and I will tell you that the sound those new hands made against Verk carapace plating is a sound that the 15 engineering personnel have described, subsequently, in terms that I find somewhat embarrassing. We held Deck 2. We held Deck 7. We held the command corridors and the medical level, and the power relay junctions that the Verk had specifically targeted, because they had learned from the first attempt what to hit. At 7:14, the 3 Verk ships began moving off vector. Not withdrawing, not quite, but repositioning to a distance that suggested they were recalculating. Their models had broken against something they had not included. They needed to build a new one. At 7:19, Admiral Youn received a communication from the Velnara Sovereignty Diplomatic Council, not from Savith Iorath, from the council itself. A request for a formal meeting. That was all. A request for a meeting, which, in the diplomatic syntax of a civilization that had been neutral for 4 years, meant something very specific. I was in the medical bay again. Different reasons this time. One of my ribs had decided it was done being a rib in the conventional sense, and there was a laceration across my left shoulder that needed attention. But the ceiling was the same pale gray with the same diagonal water stain, and I was lying there looking at it when Savith came in. She sat down in the chair beside my bed. She looked at my hands, the new dark iridescent hands with their blade-curved nails that were currently resting on the blanket and catching the medical bay light and shifting it into colors I still didn't have names for. "The council wants to talk," I said. "Yes. Because of what you told them." "Because of what happened," she said, with precise distinction. "What I told them was why it would happen. What happened is the evidence they required." I looked at the ceiling. "How much trouble are you in?" "Less than I expected," she said. "The council's position is complex. They are recalculating." Is that a Velnara way of saying they changed their minds? Something moved in her face. I had seen that movement before, not often. It was, I'd come to understand, the expression she made when something surprised her into something close to warmth. It is a Velnara way of saying that they encountered data that invalidated their previous model, she said. The outcome is the same. What data? She was quiet for a moment. Outside the viewport, the stars were exactly where they always were, cold and permanent and patient. A man who could not calculate his way out of a fight, she said, who got up from a floor with no weapons and no odds and went at something 3 times his capability because there was a person behind him, who woke up with hands he had never seen before and tested their limits on a piece of furniture to make sure he would not break a cup. She paused. My people have been calculating the cost of involvement for 4 years. We are very good at cost analysis. What we could not model was this. What is this? I don't know the right word in your language, she said. In Velnari, the closest term translates approximately as the willingness to be damaged in the direction of someone else's survival. She looked at me directly, those wide amber eyes steady and precise, and holding something that calculations could not account for. My people have no experience with it. I have been trying to explain it to the council for 4 weeks. I am not sure I have succeeded, but they watched the security recording. The recording again. The armory, Tuesday, a man with a wrench and 2.4 seconds and someone behind him. It is not easy to watch, she said quietly, even knowing the outcome. I didn't say anything for a while. The medical bay was very still. Down the corridor, someone was running a diagnostic on something that beeped at irregular intervals, and the ventilation moved its recycled air through the space with its faint metallic breath. The hands, I said eventually, they're permanent. Yes, she said. I don't mind, I said, which was both true and not sufficient. I looked at them, dark, iridescent, shifting light into colors that didn't have names yet, grown from what was left, something new from the ruins of what had been. They're mine now. Yes, she said. And you're still here, I said, not an accusation, an observation. A fact I was offering up the way she offered up facts directly without dress. She looked at me for a long time. I submitted my residency extension to the station commander this morning, she said. 90-day extension. Standard diplomatic protocol. You didn't have to do that. I know. You could go home, answer for the protocols you broke, start the recalculation. The recalculation has already started, she said, and I find that I want to remain here while it proceeds. The pause she gave me then was not a calculating pause. It was a different kind, the kind that belonged to something that had moved beyond cost analysis. I also find that I want to ask you further questions. About what? About the bar fight in Lisbon, she said. You have told me very little about the bar fight in Lisbon. I looked at her. Something was loosening in me that had been held tight since Tuesday, since the armory, since the floor with no arms and the number I didn't want to do the math on. Something was loosening the way things loosen when they're finally allowed to. It was not my finest hour, I said. I assumed not, she said, and the warmth was there again, that rare thing in her precise face. Tell me anyway. I told her anyway. The Werk issued no third chronological tolerance. This is not because they gave up or changed their minds. The Werk do not change their minds in the way that phrase implies. They recalculate. They encountered data they had not included in their models, and they withdrew to build new ones. That is what the intelligence analysts said afterward anyway. That the pause was strategic, that they would come back differently. Maybe, probably, the Werk do not give up. But the Velnara sovereignty sent a delegation to Kelsara Station 31 days after Savith's protocol breach, and the delegation included 3 senior council members and a significant amount of diplomatic equipment. And what came out of that meeting was something that the Werk had not included in their models and could not include, because it was not the result of calculation. It was the result of a man who couldn't get out of the way. I was in the observation deck when the Velnara diplomatic shuttle docked. I was watching it through the viewport with my new hands folded on the railing in front of me, feeling the cool of the metal through scales that were more sensitive than the skin they'd replaced, watching the lights of the dock play across the shuttle's hull. Savith came and stood beside me. Nervous? She asked. No, I said, which was not quite true but close enough. I looked at my hands. Are you? She considered the question with her characteristic precision. I am recalculating, she said. I looked at her. That warm thing was in her face again, and I was close enough now to see that it was not calculated, not diplomatic, not a performance of warmth designed to achieve an outcome. It was just there, the way facts were just there, true, unadorned, present. How do you say thank you in Velnari? I asked. She said a word that the translator rendered as 3 distinct sounds, and she made the sounds in the original language, not the translation. And I practiced it badly twice and then better on the 3rd try, and she made a sound I had not heard from her before, which was quiet and quick, and which I understood after a moment was laughter. Close enough, she said. The delegation filed past us on their way to the diplomatic suite. One of the senior council members paused and looked at my hands for a moment, not with alarm, with something between recognition and calculation, as if checking something off an internal list. Then she looked at Savith and said something in Velnari that went too fast for the translator. What did she say? I asked, after the council member had moved on. Savith was quiet for a moment. She said, so that is the human, she said. And then she said, I see why you stayed. Outside the viewport, the stars were exactly where they always were. The Verk ships were 40,000 kilometers out, still and dark and thinking. And here, inside the station's light, there was a diplomatic shuttle and a senior council and the possibility of something that had not existed 2 months ago. 2 months, 2 arms, 1 man who could not make himself move. I stood with my new hands on the railing and looked out at all of it, and I thought about what it meant to be made of the same stuff as always, rearranged into something that had no prior name. Human still, always. Just more than it had been. Some things get lost and never come back. Some things get lost, and what grows in their place is something the loss could not have predicted. I don't know which kind of truth is more important. I suspect both are, and I suspect the distinction doesn't matter as much as people think, out here in the dark, with the stars watching and the enemy thinking and someone beside you who came back when she could have run. Private Carrillo's, it turned out, had heard the second breach alarm from 3 decks away, and had already been moving toward the sound before the order was given. She came by the medical bay the morning after the second defense and stood in the doorway for a moment, looking at my hands with that expression I now knew was awe, and she said, "Dragon claws, Sarge." And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "That's the most human thing I've ever seen." I have thought about that a lot. I still think about it. What she meant, whether she knew what she meant, whether it was true. I think it was. I think when you can't make yourself step aside, you become something the universe was not expecting. And the universe, even the cold, precise, calculating part of it, has to decide what to do with you. I have new hands. They are dark and iridescent and stronger than anything I was before. I do not know what they make me, exactly, in any taxonomy that matters. I know what I am. Sergeant Darian Cole, 29 years old. Brown hair that still needs cutting. Scar on my chin from Lisbon. A woman beside me who says things directly and asks too many questions and laughed once at my pronunciation. And hands that have no name yet. We are working on that. The Velnara Council meeting lasted 3 days. I was not in it, obviously. I was a sergeant with temporary prosthetics and a broken rib, and the diplomatic machinery of a 200 billion soul civilization was not something that required my input. But Savith came to the observation deck each evening after the sessions ended and told me, in her precise and unadorned way, what had happened, and what was being decided, and what was not being decided, and what the council members had said about the security recording that Admiral Youn had given them access to at Savith's request. Counselor Varoth says the human reflex you demonstrated is not rational, she told me on the second evening. She said it the way you report data, not the way you say something is wrong. She has reviewed human neurological literature on what your researchers call the bystander protection instinct and finds it inconsistent with survival optimization. What did you tell her? I asked. I told her that was why it worked, she said. We were sitting in the observation deck with its wide viewport and its view of station lights and star field and the distant bright points that were the Verk ships. I had a cup of something Savith had brought from the diplomatic quarters, not coffee, not tea, something the Velnara made from a fermented grain that had a smoky sweetness I had decided I liked very much. I held it in my new hands and felt the warmth through the scale-textured skin, which was more sensitive than it looked. Everything was more sensitive than it looked these days. The recycled air tasted of things it had always tasted of, but I could taste them now instead of just breathing them. Counselor Veroth is not wrong, I said. No, Savith agreed. She is precisely correct that it is not optimal. What she is having difficulty understanding is that optimal was not the available choice. It was, I said. I could have moved. You could have generated the physical action of moving, she said, with the precise Velnari distinction she made when she found humans imprecise. That is not the same as it being a choice available to you. She turned to look at me with those amber eyes that held light the way wells held water. I have been thinking about this for longer than I have told you. What you did in the armory is not unusual for humans. I have reviewed documented instances across your military history, individuals who placed themselves between harm and another person in situations where the arithmetic was clear and the rational action was retreat. The frequency is notable. And in most cases, when survivors are asked why, the answer is a version of what you told me. Because someone was behind them. Yes, she looked back at the stars. The Velnara have a similar biological architecture. We evolved in social groups. We have care instincts, protection instincts. They exist in us. But in our evolutionary history, the calculative layer developed very early and very strongly, and for hundreds of thousands of years it has been the filter through which those instincts pass. By the time the protection impulse becomes action in a Velnara, it has been assessed and weighed and assigned a probability of success. She paused. In humans, I am beginning to believe that filter is much thinner. You're saying we're bad at calculating our survival odds, I said. I am saying, she said carefully, that something in you calculates faster than your survival odds, and that thing is not a weakness. It took me a long time to understand the distinction. Counselor Veroth has not yet reached it. Counselor Dean has. She paused again. Counselor Dean watched the armory recording 4 times. I thought about that, about being watched from outside, the version of me that existed in that recording, in the smoke and the alarm and the wrongness of the moment. What they saw that I couldn't see from inside it, whether it looked like what I'd felt or whether it looked like something else entirely from the outside. What does it look like? I asked. From outside. It looks, she said and paused, and when she spoke again there was something in her voice I had not heard before, a quality that her precise Velnari inflection usually filtered out, something underneath the precision that was very quiet and very serious. It looks like the opposite of calculation. It looks like a decision made before thought, which my people have always assumed was error, instinct misfiring. She looked at me. It does not look like error. That is what the council is having difficulty processing. It looks like something that made a decision faster than the arithmetic could, and was correct. I drank the smoky sweet drink and thought about error and instinct, and the 2.4 seconds in the armory that I did not really remember except as sensation and momentum. It wasn't correct, I said. I lost both arms. You lost both arms, she agreed, and 11 died, and 301 did not. We sat with that for a while. The stars were patient as they always were. On the 3rd evening, Counselor Dean came to find me herself. She was older than Savith, harder to read the age on a Velnaran face, but there was something about her bearing that went back decades, the quality of someone who had been saying difficult things in large rooms for a very long time and had made a certain peace with it. She found me in the mess hall, which I had returned to mostly because Carrillo's had told me they were back to proper food rotation, and I had not had anything that wasn't medical bay calories in 6 weeks. She sat across from me and looked at my hands for a moment without speaking. I let her look. "The language doesn't translate well," she said finally. The translator gave her Velnari a slightly different texture than Savith's, older inflection patterns, more formal. But in Velnari, when something changes the direction of a probability calculation, we say it has altered the river, not stopped it, not reversed it, changed its course. She paused. "You altered a river that has been running the same direction for 4 years. Savith altered it," I said. "She's the one who broke the protocols and stayed." "Savith altered it because you gave her data she could not ignore," the counselor said. "The distinction matters. She is an excellent diplomat and a rigorous analyst, and she had been on the station for 4 months watching humans do what humans do, and she had not yet found the thing that her models were missing." The counselor's large amber eyes were steady on me. "She found it in the armory recording." I looked at my food. "It was Tuesday," I said. "I was cleaning a rifle, it wasn't strategic." "I know," she said. "That is precisely the point." She stood. "The sovereignty will formally communicate its position to Admiral Youn before we depart. The language will be careful." A pause. "The meaning will not be." She looked at my hands one more time, then at my face. "Take care of her," she said quietly, in a register that the translator captured but gave slightly imperfectly, something between an order and something older than an order. "I'll try," I said. The counselor left. The mess hall went on being a mess hall around me, with its sounds of people eating and talking, and the low-level background noise of a station that had been in crisis and was now, cautiously, breathing. Carrillo's came in 10 minutes later, got food, dropped into the chair across from me. "You know, the whole diplomatic corps is quietly recalibrating everything they thought they knew about humans, right?" she said. "They're just doing their job," I said. "The 3 Verk ships moved another 20,000 kilometers farther out this morning," she said. "Station sensors caught it. Slow, deliberate repositioning, like they're thinking." She looked at my hands. "Dragon claws, Sarge, I'm telling you." I looked at my hands too. The mess hall light played across them and found deep blues and violets at the angles. They were mine. I was still learning what that meant. "Did you know," Carrillo said conversationally, cutting into something on her tray, "that the Velnara's defensive capability includes an orbital platform network with adaptive shielding that our entire fleet couldn't crack in 3 months of sustained engagement?" "I did not know that," I said. "Lieutenant Farrow briefed us while you were in medical," she said. 60,000 soldiers, 7 capital ships, and they've been sitting out the Verk incursion for 4 years because they ran the numbers and didn't like the cost analysis." She looked at me. "And then one sergeant with a wrench goes at 3 kill units because he can't make himself walk away, and suddenly the numbers change." "Savith changed the numbers," I said, again. "Savith is brilliant and I like her very much," Carrillo said. "But Savith changed because of you. You're upstream of this whole thing." She put down her fork and looked at me with an expression that was too serious for her age, which was the same expression she'd had when she came back around the corridor bend instead of running. "Do you know what I thought about when I came back? When I heard the breach alarm and turned around instead of following the evacuation route?" "No," I said. "I thought about Deck 7, she said. "I thought about who was on Deck 7. I thought about you specifically, because you were the only one I knew was heading down there when the alarm went off." She picked up her fork again. "And I couldn't do the math on leaving." The mess hall went on around us. Someone dropped a tray. The ventilation system breathed its recycled breath. Outside, 60,000 kilometers farther than yesterday, 3 Verk ships held position and recalculated. This is the thing about humans that I have tried to explain to Savith and have never quite managed. Not because it is complicated, it is very simple, which may be why it resists explanation. We are not particularly large. We are not particularly strong. We are not the fastest or the most durable or the most cognitively efficient species in the space we occupy. We evolved on a single planet in an unremarkable solar system, and for most of our existence, we were far too occupied with each other to pay much attention to the rest of the universe. But we do this thing. This infuriating, irrational, arithmetically indefensible thing where we turn around. When we should be running, we turn around. When the numbers say go, we go back. When the corridor is clear and the exit is behind us, and every calculation says survival is in one direction, we look at the person who is not yet safe and we cannot make ourselves leave them there. I do not know if this is a flaw in our wiring or if it is the best thing about us, and I am not sure the distinction matters. Private Carrillo's turned around. I went forward. Savith stayed when she could have reported and been done. Counselor Dean watched the recording 4 times because something in it was adding up to something her models needed to include. The Verk are efficient, the Verk are precise, the Verk calculate. We turn around. The Velnara sovereignty's formal communication arrived on the Admiral's desk the morning after the diplomatic delegation departed. Savith gave me the summary standing in the observation deck at 800. Both of us watching the station, lights catch the departure shimmer of the diplomatic shuttle as it curved toward its jump coordinates. They said yes, I said. They said yes, she confirmed. To involvement. To involvement. She watched the shuttle. It took the Council 3 days and approximately 900 years of established neutrality doctrine and the modification of 14 standing protocols, but yes. They said yes. The shuttle found its vector and was gone. We stood in the quiet of the observation deck with the stars and the distant small lights of 3 Verk ships that were, sensors confirmed, still moving outward, still recalculating, still building a new model for a situation their previous model had not been built to include. What will you do now? I asked. Your posting here, technically it was for the neutrality period, if the sovereignty is entering the conflict. My posting has been reclassified, she said. I am now the primary Velnara diplomatic liaison to the human defense perimeter. Kelsara Station is the logical base of operations. She looked at me. I will be here for some time. How long? I asked. The conflict's projection has a range of 2 to 7 years before resolution, she said, assuming the Velnara's involvement has the effect on Verk calculations that the Council projects. She paused. Given the variables, I would estimate I will be here for the duration. I looked at my hands. Dark, iridescent, shifting light into colors I was still learning to name. Grown from what was left, something new. 2 to 7 years, I said. Yes. That's a lot of questions, I said. The warmth moved through her face, that rare quiet thing. I have a great many questions, she said. I have not yet asked you about Lisbon, the full account. The full account of Lisbon is not flattering, I said. I assumed not, she said. Tell me anyway. Outside the viewport, the stars held their positions, patient as they had always been. The Verk ships were still there, farther than yesterday, building their new model. The Velnara shuttle was gone to its jump point, carrying 3 counselors and the beginning of something that would take months to ratify in careful bureaucratic language, and longer still to matter in the ways that things matter when wars finally end. And here in the observation deck, in the recycled air with its faint metallic taste, I started to tell her about Lisbon. She listened the way she did everything, with complete attention, without interruption, without rushing to the conclusion. She asked one question in the middle that was so precisely aimed at the detail I'd skipped over that I laughed before I caught myself, and she tilted her head at the sound, and I said for what felt like the 100th time in this story, "Tell me anyway." And she made that rare quiet laugh again. We stayed in the observation deck until the first crew rotation change, and then we moved, because neither of us had anywhere particular to be and the station had many quiet places, and we were, between us, becoming expert at finding them. 2 to 7 years, a great many questions. The beginning of something that had no name yet in any language either of us spoke, but that was being built the way things were built when old models broke, piece by piece, without a blueprint, from whatever remained after the fire. I have new hands. I have a woman beside me who came back when she could have reported and gone home. I have a station that held and a species that turns around and stars that are always where they are supposed to be, patient and permanent and watching. I am 29 years old. The universe is larger than it was on Tuesday. The Verk are still out there, recalculating. The Velnara are no longer watching from a careful distance. And somewhere in the bureaucratic language of a revised diplomatic position, in the footnotes that will take months to fully ratify, is the shadow of one wrench and 2 arms that couldn't get out of the way. That is enough. That is, I think, everything. There is a particular kind of quiet that falls over a military station in the days after a defense. Not the quiet of peace. Peace has its own sound, loose and comfortable, the sound of people who have stopped listening for the alarm. This was different. This was the quiet of people who had listened for the alarm so many times that they had forgotten how to stop, even now that the immediate crisis had paused, even now that the Verk ships were 100,000 kilometers out, and the Velnara were no longer neutral. It was a careful quiet, a quiet that kept one ear open. I understood it. I had been living in it since the armory. The difference was that now I had Savith in the morning, with her grain drink and her precise questions, and Captain Chen back on the duty rotation treating me like a sergeant again instead of a casualty, and Carrillo's, who had started showing up wherever I was with the quiet persistence of someone who had decided without asking that she was going to check on me and was not going to announce this as a thing she was doing. And I had the hands. I was in the technical workshop on Deck 4, 2 weeks after the second defense, when I discovered what else the hands could do. I had been asked to look at a relay assembly that the engineers couldn't get stable. One of the secondary power conduits that ran to the Deck 3 security systems had been damaged in the second breach, and repaired with parts that weren't quite matched, and the junction was running hot in a way that the diagnostic equipment couldn't fully map because the interface was an older standard that the newer sensors didn't talk to cleanly. I looked at the junction. I looked at my hands. I thought about what Savith had said, grown from the remaining neural architecture, not manufactured, built from what was left of me. I put my hand against the junction housing. The scale-textured skin, it turned out, was very good at reading electromagnetic fields. I don't have a better technical description than that. I'm a sergeant, not an engineer, and the engineers who subsequently studied the phenomenon have given it a name that I cannot reproduce from memory. But standing there with my hand against the housing, I could feel the current running through it the way you feel a vibration through a door before you hear the sound on the other side. I could feel where it was running wrong, a specific back pressure at a specific point that the diagnostic equipment was missing, because it was looking at the junction as a single unit, rather than as the sum of 2 mismatched parts talking to each other. I told the lead engineer, Chief Petty Officer Rawlins, where the problem was. He looked at me for a moment with the expression of someone who was revising several assumptions simultaneously. Then he sent his team to the point I'd indicated, and they found it, and they fixed it in 30 minutes. Rawlins came back to me afterward. "Can you do that with all of them?" he asked. I looked at the workshop around us, the benches and the equipment and the other relay assemblies that were running slightly wrong in ways that were probably adding up to things that mattered, quietly in the background. The station had taken damage in 2 breach attempts. There was a lot of quietly wrong. "I don't know," I said, "probably." I spent the next 3 days in the workshop with Rollins and his team. We did not talk about what was happening in any technical language that I could follow, but Rollins talked about it in tactical language, which I understood fine. He talked about capabilities and applications, and how the sensitivity mapped against known sensor limitations, and what that might mean for the station's diagnostic infrastructure going forward. I listened, and I helped, and I found 9 more problem points in the power systems that the diagnostic equipment had missed. On the 3rd day, Savith appeared in the workshop doorway. She looked at me with my hand against another relay housing. She looked at Rollins looking at a diagnostic readout with the expression of someone who had stopped being surprised and started just recording data. She looked at me again. "How long has this been happening?" she asked. 3 days, I said. "You did not tell me." "I'm telling you now," I said. "I'm still figuring out what it is." She came to stand beside me. She looked at the relay housing and then at my hand against it, the dark iridescent scales and the blade-curved nails and the extra sensitivity that had no name in my language and apparently had a name in hers, because she said a word that the translator gave me as something close to resonance reading, which was not quite right but was in the right direction. The interface protocol was designed for a species with different baseline neurology than humans, she said, with the careful precision of someone working out a calculation as they spoke. What you are describing, the electromagnetic sensitivity, is likely a function of the nerve clusters that the protocol used as a foundation. In the original design, those clusters interfaced with a sensory organ that your species does not have. She paused. In the absence of that organ, the protocol appears to have found an adjacent solution. "It built something else," I said. "Yes," she said, "from what was available." She looked at me with those amber eyes. "I did tell you it had never been used on a human subject. I did not know what additional capabilities might emerge." "Are there others?" I asked. "Other things it might have built from what was available?" She was quiet for a moment. "The original design has 7 sensory interface pathways," she said. "You appear to have developed the electromagnetic one. The others," she paused. "I do not know, we would need time to find out." Rollins had stopped pretending to look at his diagnostic readout and was listening with the transparent focus of an engineer presented with a new class of problem. "How much time?" he asked. "Months," Savith said. "Perhaps longer. The development is not predictable." She looked at me. "It will depend on what situations the individual encounters. The protocol was designed to adapt. It requires context to know what to build toward." "So what I do next determines what else develops," I said. "In a general sense," she said, "yes." I thought about that. I looked at my hands. I thought about the armory and the Verk and Counselor Dean, and the river that had been running the same direction for 4 years. I thought about Tuesday and Protein Loaf, and a private who could not do the math on leaving, and a diplomat who broke 4 protocols and stayed. "Okay," I said. Rollins looked between us. "So we keep going," he said. It was not a question. "We keep going," I agreed. The electromagnetic sensitivity was the first. Over the following weeks, careful, watchful weeks while the Verk rebuilt their models, and the Velnara ratified their position change in careful bureaucratic language, and Kelsara Station breathed its cautious post-crisis breath, 2 more pathways emerged. One of them was thermal, not in any supernatural sense, just an expanded range and precision that the engineers found useful for a different class of diagnostic problem. The other was harder to name. It was something to do with spatial geometry, an intuitive 3-dimensional mapping that expressed itself as the ability to move through spaces without looking, which was strange at first, and then useful, and then very useful in ways that Captain Chen described as tactical rather than mechanical. "You know where everyone in the room is," she said, "at my fitness evaluation 6 weeks post-recovery." "Yes," I said. "Without looking." "Yes." She made a note. "That's going in the report," she said, in a tone that suggested the report was going somewhere above her pay grade. Savith was less surprised than the captain. Spatial resonance, she said, when I described it. The third pathway in the original design. It was considered the most useful in the species it was developed for, because they operated primarily in low-visibility environments. She looked at me steadily. I will note that you are developing these considerably faster than the original design timeline predicted. Is that good or bad? I asked. It is data, she said, precise, unadorned. And then, with that warmth that came rarely and hit hard when it did, I believe it is good. The Verk issued no third chronological tolerance. That much I have said already. What I have not said is what the intelligence analysts concluded about why, not yet, not at the point in the story I am telling, but later, when the picture was clearer, and the Velnara's formal involvement had shifted the conflict's geometry in the ways that the Council had projected. The analysts concluded that the Verk's models had broken in a way that was unusual for them. Not damaged, not simply updated with new data. Broken. A model breaks when the data it receives is outside the parameters it was built to accommodate. When the system cannot simply adjust the weights, but has to discard the framework entirely. The framework they had to discard was the one that said humans were a bounded, calculable problem. A sergeant with a wrench had broken their model. Dark iridescent hands that could feel electric current had extended the break. An alien diplomat's broken protocol, and a species of 200 billion that had stopped calculating neutrality had made the break irreparable. And underneath all of that, deeper than any of the tactical or diplomatic or strategic specifics, the simple, infuriating, irrational human thing. We turn around. I think about that sometimes in the observation deck, with Savith beside me and her grain drink going cold, because we have been talking too long and neither of us noticed. I think about what it looks like from outside, the security recording, 2.4 seconds, a man who could not make himself calculate. I think about how many times that recording has been watched now, in how many council chambers and diplomatic offices and tactical briefing rooms, by how many pairs of eyes that are not shaped like human eyes and see light at wavelengths human eyes don't reach. I think about what it means that the thing which altered the river was not a weapon or a strategy or a technology. It was a refusal, a specific, stubborn, arithmetically indefensible refusal to let the calculation be the only thing that mattered. I do not know if that is a human thing uniquely, or if other species have it buried under layers of survival optimization, waiting for the right moment or the right pressure or the right armory on a Tuesday to uncover it. I have asked Savith this question several times. She gives me a different answer each time, which she says is because she does not yet have enough data, and which I think means the question is more interesting than it is answerable. I have new hands. The Verk are recalculating. The Velnara are no longer neutral. Kelsara Station has a sergeant who can feel electrical current and map a room with his eyes closed and remember, always, the particular quality of the quiet that falls over a mess hall when it's serving protein loaf on a Tuesday. I am human still, always, whatever else I am becoming. That part does not change. That part, I think, is exactly the point.